Ladies and gentlemen, we continue today with the sharing with you the best and the leading practices about how to make the planning work and in a really the most effective and efficient way. So we had the videos about the introduction on the process, on a transformation requirement, specifically organizational impact. And today we are starting here a few videos which will describe in more detail really the technical solution. So how did we build the SAP IBP and SAP Analytic Cloud model? What did we consider? What are the key functionalities? So in order that you understand how integrated process between the integrated business planning and financial planning could actually work. I have here with me Lovely and Deepak from the team who actually we built this first version of the model together. So let's start right away into going into the details. So as we discussed earlier, it is like that we have in the model considered the following things. So we took the best out of the SAP IBP and SAP Analytic Cloud in order to build the planning model, end-to-end planning model. As part of this model, you should consider as well to connect and integrate other operational systems like your ERP system, like S4, maybe CRM, HR, or maybe manufacturing execution system, because there would be a data required really for doing the planning out of those systems, right? So one of the key elements of the solution is as an integration between the SAP IBP and SAP Analytic Cloud. Anything on the data integration between SAP IBP and SAC? Maybe Deepak.
Yeah. So yeah, thanks, Robert. So here, yes, definitely. So here in SSC IBP integration, we should consider few of the things that we have observed and experienced during this SSC IBP integration. So like data granularity, what should be the data granularity? So we should think about like what should be our data look like. So here, like if we talk about date, so date should be at day level or at month level or at year level. So while building the model, we should first define at which level our date dimension should be, at what data granularity like product, and about the hierarchy we should consider for the SSC IBP integration. And all.
Okay. We had that some of the data elements which we populated through the queries to from the SAP IBP to SAC, because you were defining those query days with Lovely, right? It was like that. For example, we had to change the level in SAC. So when you were saying that thinking about granularity of the data is as well like when to aggregate and when you not aggregate.
So if already aggregation is done at IBP level, but the same thing if we will try in SSC by while fetching the data from IBP, so aggregation sometimes aggregation does not work. So it is always recommended to perform aggregation like exception aggregation at dimension level, like product, date, etc. In the SSC that is target system itself. So we should be considered like which will be our master data system. It will be either SSC or IBP.
But the key point here is that on the left hand side you see the process steps, right? Product review, demand review, up to the management business review and the lean financial forecasting, which are executed monthly. As we said, strategic planning processes are integrated once per year through the budgeting process into this environment. But what we were saying, right, Deepak and Lovely, is the following, that for each of the process step, we have to really define even on the specific activity level or a data element, what is the master system, so where the data will be derived from and copied to, and in which we will keep the master sort of data, right? So that's what you were, I suppose, referring to, right?
Yes.
proceed further in the video, and we actually proceed really with the first introduction of the few things about the product planning and demand planning into a few slides, and then we go directly into the systems. So as we discussed, one of the key elements of the solution was really the discussions which we had within the team to define really what is the master system for which part of the data elements, right? So for the transactional data, we would be using S4 or the other ERP solution. For the budget, it would be SAC because we would do the budgeting directly there. For the product planning segmentation, we would use really the SAP IBP because it has a strong functionality there, but as well for the assessment of the portfolio health, some planning some of the financial elements related to the product introduction, maybe even a new product implementation, sales price calculation, or new product implementation costing, right, could be done directly in SAC. And that's very important element here, which we would like to showcase. So, ladies and gentlemen, what you see here on the screen is it's a simplified process flow, but as well, we try to map the specific process element in the product planning and the revenue and cost planning of those new introductions versus the systems. So you see on the left-hand side really where the data comes from and what are the process steps. So this is very important when you start to do the process and the system architecture joined together, because that's what we would recommend you to do when you're building this type of a model. So you actually doing here in SAP IBP the baseline statistical forecasting for the new product being implemented based on the like product or a group of the product. You introduce a certain drivers maybe for the new product implementation if those are relevant. Very often for those type of drivers you would use external data. And then it would have to be planned and integrated how to do it. And last not least is that you actually define and agree a consensus demand plan for those new product which will be newly implemented in your portfolio. But in order to complement this type of a supply chain planning activities and commercial activities with the financial elements, we actually introduce process steps which are related to the new product implementation, pricing and costing, because at the end you would need to come up with the net revenue for those new products, and that's the flow which it sort of helps to put this together. Good. So, ladies and gentlemen, just to make it very tangible for you, I've switched now to the SAP IBP. So the process flow which we show on the PowerPoint, now we try to illustrate this with the system solution. So what you see here is that we actually are planning in SAP IBP an implementation of the new product, a phase-in, right, which does not have a sales history, but we actually define the like product base from which we take the its actuals in order to predict the future. So it is like that in SAP IBP you can actually do it on a different aggregation levels. So really very flexible when it comes to the projecting the new product implementation. Considering, of course, the different derivation rules from different countries, parts of the country regions, different products, or as well a mix of the product. But here the key part here is that SAP IBP will project the volumetric forecast for this new product, this new phase-in. Very often, we actually have the case that in the business models of our customers, and we identify this through the discussions with the many of them, that you actually plan as well the samples which actually help to boost the sales for the new product implementation, or generally are being used to boost the sales of the regular product. So samples typically are sold with the zero value, except that maybe for some countries you have some regulations that you can have, you can give it away with the €1 or something like that. But still, it would make sense to plan the samples if they are significant, because it might really generate a specific cost associated to it. We observed that for some of the customers of ours, we actually have a separate supply chain for the samples. So why do we show that? Because this is very important from the point of view of the leveraging the system and SAP IBP at its best. This type of a derivation rules, they are not existing in SAC, so you can do that in a different way, maybe there, but still this is the core functionality which is being done in the SAP IBP. So what you see here in the SAC, that we've built a model which is very comprehensive. It actually covers all the elements of the monthly process, from the product review, demand planning and demand in the revenue planning, supply and the cost planning, integrated reconciliation, where we talk about the gross profit planning, but as well management business review with the profit and loss statement planning on a scenario level. So now what we do here is actually we deep dive into the first element here, where SAC is rather providing a complementary solution to the SAP IBP. So what type of a complementary solution we actually having here? So one of the complementary solution is actually that, running the extensive analytics on the product health. So what it means is that once you do the segmentation of ABC, XYZ in SAP IBP, because there is a special functionality there, you derive those attributes associated to the specific material and you populate them here in SAC. What it means is that you can really try to make a correlation between the different measures. And for this, SAP Analytic Cloud have a very strong functionality. You see here, for example, we build the charts where there is a correlation between the certain measure, like a stock on hand versus the forecasting error. There are as well other elements of the functionality which we built in our model, assessment of the profitability and assessment as well of the introduction of the new products, but actually looking more from the year to go and year to date thing, but as well from the comparison to the budget. So one of the most important elements here, what SAC brings, is actually analytical capabilities. Ladies and gentlemen, we continue with the second process step called the demand planning and demand review, in which one of the key elements of the solution is really the planning of the product demand plan, but as well planning the revenues for the whole business model. What you see on the screen is actually assignment of the key process activities to the leading system, as we discussed with Deepak. So in here, where do we get the transactional data? Where do we get the master data from? A large extent of the master data, of course, but not the only ones. It comes from the S4 or the other ERP system or other solutions. Where do we get the budgets for in order to compare in your planning process your projections to the budget? We actually take it from SAC. Where do we do the demand planning? So really baseline statistical forecasting planning of the certain drivers associated to the product, building the consensus demand plan, running the planning for different aggregations, right? We do that in the SAP IBP because this is really supply chain planning software, and it's really has a functionality which supports that. But on the other side, planning everything which is associated to your pricing, to your net revenues, to your revenue streams, planning your provision tool will be done in the SAP Analytic Cloud. So as we said that for the demand planning and the revenue planning, we start from the baseline statistical forecasting, we run the product planning here, and then we actually agree the product consensus demand plan. Very often we actually doing the planning not only based on the statistical forecasting, but on the top of it, we actually planning certain drivers. So there are a number of the business drivers influencing your projections, and we will talk about in a moment about them, and then we actually showcase this in the tool as well. But still this supply chain planning, but more volumetric planning of your forecast is being done in the SAP IBP. And then the value planning, so revenues and net revenue planning, will actually be done in SAC as is visualized on the screen. We actually discussed that for the certain group of the products, it would make sense really, and the aggregations, it would make sense to do the planning with the use of the driver-based concept. It means that you can think of it like that, that most of the channels to which you actually sell the products, through the e-commerce, direct sales, consignment, tender business, selling through the distributor, agents, key accounts, B2B, or even which is actually you make essays through the special events or trades, right? They have its own drivers. So what it means is that they are influencing factor which actually drive the sales of the e-commerce or tenders or distributors up or down, depending what the driver is. Therefore, connecting the specific sales channel to the drivers is one of the key elements of the process architecture and then system design. But then connecting this to the planning of your cost of sales, and then combining this with the full planning of your net revenue, that's really what we will do today. And last not least, at the end of the process, it is important to understand the deviation between the net revenues which were budgeting in the strategic planning process and this monthly process. What you see here is now SAP IBP, where we do the planning of the products, right? Prediction of the products in volume. So mainly, actually, that's a main activity which we should actually do here. So what you see here is actually the following process sub-steps, I would say, within the demand planning. So first of all, what you see is that we actually can, in the first two worksheets, we can actually run the statistical forecasting based on the historical data or adjusted historical data. There is an engine in the SAP IBP which is dedicated to detecting and correcting an outlier. So you see here, for example, that there are some deviations. So one of sales, and then system is actually able, with the certain methods, detect those outliers and make the correction of it. It is as well possible to adjust the actuals with the expert input, but there is an engine for it. You can plan to execute it automatically. So the forecast automation is pretty high in SAP IBP. And then after this process step, you run the statistical forecasting. And then there is a huge portfolio of the methods in the SAP IBP. And one of them is about a time series, so single, double, and triple exponential smoothing, which can be used to plan some sort of a certain seasonal products, by the way, and it could be as well planned in a more automatic manner than it used to be in the past. So here you do the statistical forecasting on any aggregation level, so that's very flexible. You don't have to predefine it, but you can run the process on any level. And then out of the calculations which is done for each of the algorithm system will, for example, if you configure that way, select the best fit out of the methods being used for this certain group of the products. And that's what you actually see here, that in the key figure code statistical forecasting, the system is storing the best forecasting method for this specific aggregation used in the planning. So as we discussed earlier in the chart of the process flow, right, we actually use the baseline statistical forecasting at the beginning of the process, but that's not the end actually. Further on, we actually extending or expanding this baseline statistical forecasting with the planning of the specific drivers and drivers related to the products. Therefore, we move to the next step where we actually planning one of the many drivers and in the business, and this is a tender. So for many of our customers, we have possibility to record the tenders and its probability. So what it means is that for the certain customers, certain products might be on the tender, and then you are actually able to respond to it, of course, with the commercial response. But to plan for that, you can actually run the simulations on what would it be if we actually take the tender with the 50% probability of the win or higher probability of the win. Shall we consider this tender into the consensus demand plan or not. That's discussions, and that's the functionality which is there for you in the SAP IBP. The other type of drivers could be related to the price. So as part of the statistical forecasting engine in SAP IBP, you have an algorithm called multilinear regression model. And in multilinear regression model could be used to really to plan the dependency between the certain variables. So in this case, what we planned is actually what would be the impact of the price change to the on the volume. So if we would observe the correlation between the price fluctuation and the volume fluctuation in the past, system will actually detect that. And then if you're actually using the planned discount, what would be then the impact on the volume? So how much we would have to projection, how much will it show that it's higher or lower on a scenario level? Because it might be that certain scenario is for the certain increase and versus the others. So that's one of the way of using a multilinear regression for planning the drivers. The other way of planning the this in more automatic way, so meaning the planning the drivers with the not information provided by the expert, but with the information provided by the system, so automatically, is actually the planning the marketing spend. So how much it will have an impact on your volumetric potential sales. So what we're observing here is that we actually capture here a marketing spend, and we're simulating the increase of the marketing spend into the certain level. And then what's the impact of that type of increase of spend on the volumetric sales if there was a correlation observed in the past. So basically you can simulate through the multilinear regression model really how it will impact the sales of the specific product. And then you can define the different types of drivers really and plan them, as we said, either manually or with the use of the multilinear regression model in SAP IBP. But the planning process requires really a deep dive into the how the sales organization is being structured. Therefore, you actually have flexibility in SAP IBP to plan and project the sales really on various aggregation levels. So what you see here is one way of doing the demand planning is actually, we call it a bottom up, where we actually observe really that the items are being here planned by the specific sales representative on the specific products, right? And actually it is like that they have a very granular information here. So open orders are being considered, and the sales representative can really plan the volumes, and right away it will be converted into the expected revenues. But still, it is very often and the case that in the sales organization you have levels. You have a sales representative, then maybe a sales leader, regional leaders, maybe country leaders, and that's what is as well supported with the additional set of the attributes in SAP IBP. And here we actually observe that in this screen that we have planning being presented on aggregated level. So in this case for all the sales organization, and then below we actually have for the specific sales leader and for the specific representative. So it means really that you can do the planning on a detail level and aggregated seeing on the same screen, right? So if we go further, maybe I will just flip this. If we go further, we actually observe that very often our customers, we have in the demand planning process, we have a level, organizational level, which is, for example, regional or a global function. It's very often the case that it's assigned to the marketing. And this on this organizational level, we actually do the demand planning as well. It's mostly about reviewing the figures which are coming from the countries, right? But still, it would mean that you have a flexibility to do as well on the planning on the aggregated level, like here for the product family or groups, and it will be automatically disaggregated to the lower level. And as well as part of the SAP IBP, you do the comparison of those levels, so really reconciling the details with the top line planning. And this is really as well very useful because the flexibility of the data modeling is there. And last not least, before we go to the monetization of the revenues of the demand plan, it is really the consensus demand plan. So where you're actually building your consensus demand plan in volume, but as well in money, based on the different inputs. So it's statistical forecasting, inputs from the sales, inputs from the top down, from the regional team, demand planning, maybe as well the impact from the aggregated drivers, or a specific driver is being considered in the consensus demand plan. Last not least, it is important to compare these figures to the net revenue budget, and as well see if we are on the right level or we are missing really a lot already of the net revenues coming from the products. As part of the demand planning process, it's very important to assess the performance of the specific data stream and the data flow. And actually, as part of SAP IBP, you can really in-depth to analyze the performance of the specific data input and the specific forecast into the consensus demand plan. Additionally, you can and should actually assess its value add versus the statistical forecasting. So typically it's called this type of analysis is called forecast value add analysis, and this is being done very often as part of a demand planning solution in SAP IBP. So, ladies and gentlemen, what we see now is a SAP Analytic Cloud application. We took all the data from SAP IBP, meaning these volumetric plans and drivers as well, and we actually complement this with the planning of your revenues, cost of sales, and, for example, gross to net conversion. So we deep dive now into the functionality which supports still a planning of your revenues. So what you see here is a value driver tree in the SAP Analytic Cloud, so really focus on planning your gross to net conversion. What is the gross to net conversion? It's really how much portion of your revenue is actually leaking because of the potential on invoice discounts or off invoice discounts. Off invoice discounts are nothing else like a rebate, and on invoice discounts are the discounts which are applied with the special pricing conditions which defined in the price list in your ERP or S4 system, or as well because of the fact that you agreed to certain discounts with the specific customer group or a product. So, and knowing really what is the value of the discounts and the rebates is very critical for the many industries, like for example consumer products, and planning of it is actually as well very critical. So you can do the planning with the value driver tree on the aggregated level, or you can do the planning on the specific time horizon and aggregation through the product customer hierarchy directly in SAC storage. So at the end, we're trying to figure out what is the acceptable level of the discounts or aggregated discounts we would like to give this to the specific group of the customers or total country or maybe a region. And the same it comes for the rebates on the bottom. So we continue further, and I will now show you with Lovely a little bit more about the planning and revenues. So in order to complement the planning of the revenues, we use the value driver tree for the net revenues. So how did we construct it? First of all, we did try to reflect the business model granularity in this planning. So it means that we actually gathered the revenues from the selling of the licenses, services, products, but as well we have a bit of that to plan some deductions, some provisions, but commercial provisions. And that's what is actually built here in this model. So whenever we would like to make a change on the aggregated level, we will introduce change through the value driver tree. For example, planning a specific a driver to be not a 5%, but maybe to be on the level of the 10%. And then through this type of planning, we will be able to really to proceed with the planning on the aggregated level through the specific driver. So that's how we would do it. And this is really the thing we would be able to do that directly through the system. And now system has actually changed the things, and then you see that when we change the pricing, it's affecting actually this specific stream of a data, and could be affecting as well the other, because we actually may be sharing some pricing policy and so on. So we can do the planning of the drivers on the aggregated level. And now with Lovely, I think it would be a good time to show you that we can do the planning with the predictive function, combine the planning and analytics.
Thanks, Robert. As just explained, the value drivers tree that we saw earlier helps us to do top level or aggregated simulations. And in case we want to do detailed planning as well, what we have is these separate tabs in the value driver tree, these on the top. And if we open, for example, the other revenue planning tab, so we have a detailed planning table here, which has filters on the top. So if the business experts or users want to do a detailed planning or either a profit center, location, product, or for example, customer level, then they can choose the right filters and do planning for the future periods. Now we have multiple options. Either the users can do a manual input, so they can put any number that they desire here, or what we have in SAC is the predictive forecast feature. So we can go to tools, the predictive forecast option. Okay, so now we'll select the planning scenario that we need to plan upon. So let's say we want the alternative scenario and we want to say predict for the next 2 months, which is March and April 2021. What we can also do is select some of the ML algorithms that SAC provides us. So we have linear regression, we have triple exponential smoothing, or an automatic forecast, which gives the best fit model automatically. So let's go with the automatic forecast and select on preview. Okay, so now we have the predictive forecast generated for the next 2 months. Here we have the historical numbers as well, and also the dotted lines that show what is the predictive forecast generated by SAC through the ML algorithm. And what we see here within the orange limits is the new generated forecast. So let me zoom in a bit. These are the two predicted months for the future, and the orange ones are the lower and upper confidence limits, which shows how accurate would the forecast would be. And we also have the numbers here, the two numbers. So let's click OK, and these numbers will now get populated to the table.
Okay.
Okay, now it's here. All right, so now we have these two numbers generated for March and April.
Excellent, excellent. So now this is about how we actually use a predictive function as part of the planning, right, for the specific revenue stream, right, which you just showed, because the same thing could be done for the licenses or whatever, right, for the other sources of revenues. But the key message here is whenever you're talking about the planning revenues from the product, the volumetric part should really come from SAP IBP. So is there anything else which you can showcase to us in terms of like combining planning and analytics, which very often the user asks for? So maybe you can exploit a little bit of the functionality of that.
Sure. So definitely in SAC, what we can do is we can do planning as well as analytics both in one go. We can have planning tables, which would just be numerical and Excel kind of spreadsheet. And what we can also have are some beautiful visual analytical charts. So let's just try to make one. So here we already have a table populated with numbers. We can go to edit and just click on insert to have a visual view as well. So this would insert a chart here. Okay, so let's say we want to compare certain measures, say okay, so let's say we are planning for the net revenue e-commerce sales, as well as comparing maybe the actual e-commerce or the consensus forecasted volume. We have to add a certain time dimension. Maybe if we have to create a time series chart. We'll choose a time series chart here and also the correct version scenario. So the alternate version. Okay, now in a moment, this has given us a time series trend chart and also a dynamic time filter below, so we can drag left or right to see the zoomed in or zoomed out view of the trend, how the e-commerce actuals and the forecasted is moving, and can also compare what was the actual numbers for e-commerce and what was
Excellent.
forecasted.
Excellent. And this type of a combination between the planning and analytics. So then when you are doing the planning with the use of the predictive function, or maybe when you're doing the entry by as an expert, right, would actually help really to enrich the, get some additional insight, because the comparisons are the, you can zoom as you're saying, you can dynamically move across the horizons, right? And then you actually focus on the certain elements of it, right? So that it's just really more easy for the users to do the planning with that type of an approach. In the value driver tree, we actually planning the net revenues, but as we discussed, the information comes from the SAP IBP. That's an example of the information we pulled from it, because we wanted to, on a stream level, because we wanted to monetize this in the proper way with the proper financial drivers, right? We have a summary of the other sources of revenue, which are planned in more depth in the with the use of the stories and predictive functions, as we showcase to you. We have an overview of the performance of the net revenue performance, the year to go, and targets, and the comparison really between the countries and different aggregation level. Last not least, we as well pull the information about the demand planning performance into the SAC, just to ensure that we have enough of information in one environment to make planning decisions. And last not least, I would like to showcase to you how to plan the cost of sales. So with the use of this model. So in our model, we actually consider that cost of sales are contributing quite a lot into the profit and loss statement. And in the business model of our customers, we gather the information that we actually have the planning of the provisions, which are part of the cost of sales associated to the write-offs. So very often in the perishable goods, we actually have to plan really the provision for the write-off, not only for the perishable, but as well if it's the life of the product is limited to the specific time horizon, like in the pharma industry, that you have to plan destroying those type of items. The other type of a cost of sales is a marketing spend, where you're planning your advertisement, promotional, and more maybe as samples, right? And you can plan the samples through your ratios. You can plan a promotional spend on aggregated level, or with the use of the stories, and plan them with the analytical sort of a predictive functions for it. And as well, you can plan an advertisement spend. So what we are trying to say here is that the business model which you are operating at could be actually defined here in SAC as a separate a stream of planning of your costs. Many of our customers have a cost associated to the warranties, and of course, as we discussed earlier, a planning of your net revenues coming from the services and licenses, of course, have an associated cost of it. Therefore, you should actually take into account the planning of them as well. Ladies and gentlemen, what we actually showcase to you as to explaining you the concept, and then as well showcasing in the tool, is a product review, where the SAP IBP was mainly the system really to execute a certain parts of the process. Then when it comes to the demand planning and the planning your revenues, we actually showcase to you that SAP IBP is extremely strong in planning of your prediction associated to the products, and then complemented with planning of the revenues, as Lovely was showcasing to us. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so we presented now the first part of the functional deep dive into the SAP IBP and SAC. I would like to thank my colleagues, Deepak and Lovely, for supporting me in this presentation. So thank you, Deepak. Thank you, Lovely. And then
thanks.
Okay, good.
Thanks, Robert. Thank you, everyone.